Hi, I'm Kendall Behrens, and I did my economic literature analysis on minimum wage. The first article I read was The Economics of Minimum Wage Legislation by George Stigler in 1946. He asks two questions in the article. Does the legislation of increased minimum wage decrease poverty, and are there more efficient alternatives? So the idea is that workers are paid their real wage or marginal product, and an increased minimum wage means that workers are required to produce a higher marginal product. So if there's an increase in minimum wage, workers that are below that either need to produce more and put more effort into work, or they will be discharged. So there's actually an idea that some people stay, and like the people that benefit from an increased minimum wage are those who increase productivity, or those who are close enough to the minimum wage and employers can afford to keep them on staff. But he claims that if employers decided the wage, it will actually increase the employment level, which will increase marginal product, which will increase the output. He used hypothetical and like a hypothetical situation to illustrate this, and it showed that an increase in wage increased the marginal cost, which decreased the marginal product. So this means that if the wage is too high, he will actually have to let workers go, and that's going to increase unemployment, which is going to increase poverty. But he says that minimum wage isn't a good measurement of poverty because it is based on hourly, and most families earn an annual salary. So he showed this because the percent distribution of wage earners of family by the number of earners, and low-income families only had one earner of annual salary, and like higher income families had two or more. And he got this information from the State of Minnesota Resource Commission, which I believe is a reliable source. And he also states that other like sources of income, such as interest and like stocks, aren't accounted for in the poverty level because it's usually based on income, like annual or minimum wage. And he said that minimum wage families actually do have some source of other income. He got this from the composition of income in wage earning families of Minnesota. So overall, the goal of minimum wage is to decrease poverty, but in this article we can see that that's not necessarily true, and it won't necessarily decrease poverty. And there's always going to be an incentive to earn more. So people are going to want to work harder to earn this minimum wage. And there are more effective alternatives than raising minimum wage, such as employment, letting the employer decide the wage level. For my second article, I read The Impact of National Minimum Wage on Small Firms, written by James Arrowsmith in 2003. He claims that the increase in national minimum wage affects small businesses more heavily. Small businesses tend to have a family-orientated environment, which makes them more informal. For his data, he interviewed 5 businesses. 28 of them were hotel catering businesses, and 27 were clothing businesses. And he interviewed the head of the business and the staff below, which makes this very opinionated. In his research, he found that when minimum wage increased, firms either applied the minimum wage, ignored it, or had a repositioning of staff. When the minimum wage was applied, it was either because workers were already getting paid around the minimum wage, but when it was applied to the clothing firms, they were getting paid by piece work pay, so employment went down because the hours were so long. And new advancements in technology allowed for the marginal cost of labor to decrease, so he could keep more staff hired. Some of the firms ignored the pay, which is illegal, but that's cool. They hired these workers off the books. Mostly the hotel catering businesses did this because they allowed for other benefits. So they could pay less than the minimum wage, but pay their workers for transportation. They could get free meals and insurance. And in the clothing industry, they used to have weekly pay for a certain quota, but now these firms couldn't pay for it, so they either hired them for like underground competition. And the other thing that happened was the reposition or reorganization of staff. Some of the clothing businesses actually went out of business, and some changed their brands to brand names and more luxury markets because there was no more incentive to work. They could work hard and not meet quota or not work as hard. And the hotel catering businesses reorganized their staff and hired more younger and less skilled staff to avoid paying adult experienced staff wage. Overall, this study found that the informality of small businesses and the close relationship of staff to employer relationships allows for a lower wage because they feel closer and they earn more benefits. For my third article, I read The Impact of Minimum Wage on Other Wages, written by Grossman in 1983. And he claims that occupational wages and salaries are affected by an increase in minimum wage. He creates multiple equations for hypothetical situations to find what the ideal wage would be for a certain increase in minimum wage. He has two claims that there's an equity effect, which means that when minimum wage increases, less skilled workers get paid more for not as much work, and so the more skilled workers put in less effort until their wage is increased. So this ultimately means that a minimum wage increase has to increase higher skilled occupational increases. And the other was the substitution effect. This means that there's an increased demand for skilled workers because the marginal cost of labor is going up. They want to produce more, and that's gonna be done by hiring more skilled workers. So what he did, he took 9 time series cross-sectional samples. So one sample was all the wage information for one occupation from the years 1960 through 1975 in a non-manufacturing industry. So 4 of the 9 wages were plant employees and 5 were office employees. And he did quarterly analysis each year, except for in 2 cities. He did it every quarter to assume the wage adjustment over the period of time that this study went on, and that was a very good move by him because it allows for the adjustment of wages. The study found that the change in equity happens almost immediately in the short term, but the substitution effect happens over a longer period of time because it's not seen as fast. So basically this simple model of 9 different jobs for different cities around the U.S. was created to show wage comparison. And the study ultimately found that when workers compare wages, there's a dissatisfaction from higher skilled laborers when the minimum wage goes up, and it causes a lack of effort, which then causes the firm to increase occupational wages. Ultimately, I thought this was a very interesting article, and I know there is a lot of inflation during this time, which could be a significant factor, but overall it was a good idea, and I do agree with a lot of his studies. For my fourth article, I read the effect of minimum wage on employment and hourly in the terms of teenagers, written by Madeline Zavodny, and she claimed that there would not necessarily be a decrease in employment amongst teens, but a decrease in the teen hours. So she explained the traditional model that a binding or an increase in minimum wage would eventually increase the labor supply and decrease the labor demand. But in this scenario, she also talks about the substitution of skilled versus unskilled workers, but she calls them affected and unaffected workers. Her data used the current population survey from 16 to 19-year-olds during the years 1979 through 93, and she asked the teens every 4 months about their wage and hourly, how many hours per week they work. So she split it up into two parts. She did the state level and the individual level. The state level was basically an average of all teens, and there was not a lot seen there. Like, really, she didn't prove much with any of her statistics. She just found that there was minimal correlation between minimum wage and employment levels on average. But she brought it down to the individual level, and she classified workers as either affected or unaffected by the minimum wage. Affected workers would be someone who's earning below minimum wage and would have to increase their productivity, or and unaffected would be someone who's already earning minimum wage or higher, and these are typically older high school graduates. They're considered the more skilled. Her evidence showed that businesses would increase the hours of the more skilled workers and decrease the hours of the unskilled workers, but the total employment did not decrease significantly over the whole time period. 73% of the teens that were employed were still employed. From this article, I was able to draw some interesting conclusions because of her use of statistics, and basically I found that employment levels do not necessarily decrease because of an increase in minimum wage, but the hours do change amongst skilled and unskilled workers. And there was also probably some substitutions for technology that she could have mentioned. I know we were in an advancing period, like we've always been in an advancing period of technological era, but overall I thought it was a good use of a good project. For my fifth and final article, I read about the polarization of the job market and the effects on minimum wage by David Autor in 2010. And he basically throughout the article claimed that the jobs in the U.S. were polarizing to high skill, high wage, and low skilled, low wage workers for multiple reasons. This basically means that we're losing a middle skilled class. We have more and more people earning a higher wage that are highly skilled, and we have more and more people who are lower skilled and lower wage. So it's becoming this U shape. He basically drew conclusions from other people's studies for the reasons why this was happening. Obviously, education level is a huge one. We have the college degree is more valued now than before. And he also mentioned something called routine work. This would be something for like high school graduates, but not necessarily a college student. It would be considered middle skilled work. It is just like a well understood procedure, and it's this is like a problem because it's being taken over by our advancements in technology. So because of these technological advancements, we have an increased demand in non-routine tasks. This is things, he classified it into abstract and manual tasks. Abstract would be like a typical office worker, problem solving, thinking, and a manual would be something along the lines of a more visual, good communication, physically adept job. Usually the abstract requires a higher level of education, and you get obviously probably more likely a higher level of wage, and the manual doesn't require as much education. He also contributes this polarization to the rise in minimum wage because now there are more lower skilled jobs that are earning higher income. But these lower skilled jobs aren't necessarily in high demand, but we have more and more people wanting them. I thought Autor's use of statistics wasn't very relevant, nor did he use enough. He could have used way more case studies. He could have contributed for a lot more factors, but he didn't. Basically, he concluded that there was a learning inequality which was causing the changes of income and the changes in minimum wage. He basically, at the end, it was a suggestion paper. He suggested for students to start going to school. He suggested for more skill development in K through 12 grades and basically developing job opportunities in other developing industries such as like eco-green friendly areas. But overall, I thought this article was not very significant.